Deciding whether to take a vaccine or not may be difficult for many African Americans. History tells us this could be another trap, while concerns for the present and hope for the future tells us taking a vaccine is the best way forward. What I would like for you to understand is this. There are many factors African Americans may take into consideration when making healthcare decisions of this magnitude. This video will shed light on a few of them. Scientific racism is a use of science to justify racism and racial superiority. This was used to justify slavery and bogus theories that continue to negatively impact the health of African Americans. For example, scientific racism supported the theory that African Americans could tolerate more pain than whites due to their primitive nervous system. It's theories like this from the 1800s that continue to negatively impact the health of African Americans hundreds of years later. Now let's fast forward to 2016, when the University of Virginia conducted a study that found that 66% of African Americans will receive no pain treatment compared to whites that also complain about the same levels of pain. Or a different 2016 study that found that 40% of first and second year medical students still believe that black people have thicker skin than white people. Maybe that's why the black infant mortality rate is over 2 times higher than the white infant mortality rate. Or black women are more likely to experience preventable maternal death compared to white women. Or black patients with bone fractures are significantly less likely to receive painkillers than white patients. Or black children with appendicitis are more likely to be denied pain medication for moderate pain and receive significantly smaller doses of pain medication for severe pain when compared to white children with similar levels of pain. And those are just a few of the facts that African Americans have to think about when making healthcare decisions. Knowing you, an African American in the United States, has a greater likelihood of experiencing negative health outcomes due to the current healthcare system makes healthcare decisions incredibly challenging. If you think those negative outcomes are due to genetics, you are sorely mistaken. Now, if we look at the negative birth outcomes I mentioned earlier, this chart shows that African women who have not lived their entire life in the United States have the same birth outcomes as white women. However, their daughters, the very next generation who have lived their entire life in the United States, have birth outcomes equal to the general African American population. That clearly shows the issue is not genetics, but something in the United States that continues to contribute to the negative health outcomes experienced by the African American population. Those negative health outcomes makes it difficult for African Americans to take a vaccine offered by the very healthcare system that continues to fail African Americans. Now, I'm not advocating for or against taking a vaccine. What I am advocating for is understanding the decision to take the vaccine or not take the vaccine is not easy. That decision comes with a lot of baggage and is an individual's choice. That choice will be made based off of historical evidence, current circumstances, and the level of transparency shown throughout the entire process. All that boils down to this. Do African Americans trust the healthcare system this time? The combination of health and science has resulted in centuries of fear and pain for many African Americans. African Americans' distrust of research industries and the healthcare system is the number one barrier to them taking a vaccine. The vaccine was created by the very industries African Americans overwhelmingly distrust for various reasons. Here's a fun fact for you. During the Civil War and for many years after, scientists theorized that African Americans were a completely different species. Believing a human being is an entirely different species allows you to conduct the most heinous experiments without care to the physical and mental pain your actions cause your subjects and their families. The most common example of this is the Tuskegee Experiment. For those of you who are unaware, the Tuskegee Experiment, actually titled Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male, was designed and operated by the United States Public Health Service and later reaffirmed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the CDC. Yes, the very CDC we continuously see in the national news talking about the pandemic. So the Tuskegee Experiment studied the impacts of untreated syphilis in black men. Now here's where stereotypes can get you hurt or even killed. The belief was that black men had larger genitals and a higher sex drive than white men, which would lead them to spreading diseases like syphilis at a much higher rate. They also believed that even if a cure was available, the African American man wouldn't even take the cure. Those unsubstantiated beliefs are what led to the Tuskegee Experiment. So health officials selected rural Macon County, Alabama as their testing grounds. Now, why would they choose Macon County, Alabama of all places? It was 82% black, it had a high illiteracy rate, and there was low income. To recruit and retain the subjects, health officials went as far as to offer free hot meals and free medical care, which was critical to survival during these times since this was during the Great Depression. And to ensure the subjects never found out they were even infected, the officials asked the subject's primary physician to withhold their positive test results, and the primary physician complied. These experiments continued from 1932 to 1972. To put that in perspective, my parents, not my great-great-great-great-grandparents, but my actual living parents were in their 20s when this experiment was exposed and forced to conclude. For 40 years, 400 syphilis-infected African American males were never informed of their infection, although researchers were aware and watched as the disease killed 128 of them. For 40 years, 400 African American males were forced to suffer through painful spinal taps and other painful complications while officials deliberately withheld a cure that was actually available during the experiments. For 40 years, 400 African American males unknowingly spread syphilis to their girlfriends and wives, while some of their children inherited disease from them. For 40 years, 400 African American males thought the government and research institutions were trying to improve their health. But as we all know now, they were not. Now, if you think the Tuskegee experiment was bad, wait until I tell you about the even more egregious and disturbing examples that further explain why taking a vaccine or not taking a vaccine is a very difficult decision for African Americans. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you're notified the next time I post my next video.